The world's a pretty big place. With our busy lives, no reasonable person can be expected to keep up with the biggest headlines each week, so I'm here to do it for you. This is Tony Pearson coming to you on behalf of WHIP with this week's Big Picture. Well, it's been a while, but I'm not happy to say that it's once again that time of the month/year. North Korea is in the news for doing something dangerous. The past few years have been rough with relations between North Korea and the outside world. Well, I shouldn't say the past few years. It's actually been rough for like 50 plus years. But anyway, the brutal dictatorship has been making advances in their nuclear program, which much of the world doesn't want them to have in the first place. The only point of comfort for many has been that, despite now possessing the technology to build a nuke, North Korea doesn't have missiles advanced enough to nuke anything outside of its immediate neighborhood. As with anything else, with time, it seems that they're learning. This past week, North Korea performed its latest ballistic missile test, launching a medium-range missile about 300 miles east toward the Sea of Japan. South Korea and Japan have both denounced the test, which makes sense seeing as they are North Korea's neighbors. Additionally, NATO and the European Union have also denounced the test, and President Trump has of course sided with our allies Japan and South Korea. So, while North Korea still doesn't really have the means to target the US, we're just too far away, this is just a friendly reminder from North Korea themselves that they're still a threat, and it makes you wonder how long it's going to be until they can target things farther away. But for a while now, we haven't really been doing much about North Korea, and I have a feeling that it's probably going to stay that way. Moving on, Germany has elected 61-year-old Social Democrat Frank-Walter Steinmeier as its new president. Steinmeier is one of Germany's more popular politicians, but the position of president in Germany is much more ceremonial and symbolic in nature compared to here in the US, where the president has a hell of a lot of power. He'll represent Germany as far as foreign affairs go, which should be interesting as Steinmeier is also an outspoken critic of Donald Trump. More specifically, he's described Trump as a quote-unquote hate preacher, going on to speak out against his right-wing populism and his focus on making politics with fear, which, love him or hate him, isn't exactly wrong. In the end, though, Steinmeier really is favored by the German people, it seems, with his straight-talking ways, and he'll officially be on the job starting March 19th. Moving from one powerful politician to the next, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is likely going to be indicted on corruption charges related to bribery allegations, at least according to a national broadcaster from Israel, Channel 2. This will officially come to a head within the next 6 or so weeks, but in short, here's what's going on. Netanyahu has been accused of accepting tens of thousands of dollars in gifts from businessmen, as well as a €1 million gift from a French businessman currently in prison for large-scale tax fraud. Netanyahu has, of course, explicitly denied all of this, which makes sense, seeing as it would look pretty bad for both him and Israel if he were to be indicted. This would make him the second prime minister of Israel in a row to be brought down by corruption charges. And this is a pretty big deal in Israel. The prime minister is essentially like the president here in the US, and it's a really big deal when your country's leader is found to be, well, a criminal. Anywho, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. Right now, it is more of a strong rumor than anything, but if it happens, it's gonna be a big deal. Moving on to a country where the president can get away with crime, one of Russian President Vladimir Putin's critics is in a coma with organ failure after being poisoned. This is not the first time Vladimir Kara-Murza has been poisoned, as he suffered kidney failure in 2015 due to a similar incident. This is also not the first time that Kremlin opposition has been poisoned, shot, or otherwise silenced, but this is a reminder that these kinds of things, well, they can happen in Russia. For some reason, I feel like a lot of people seem to forget that these days. Anywho, Russia has had a sort of, I want to say spotty past, not just with the current administration, but with administrations in general, silencing oppositions with violence. But more recently, Reporters, politicians, etc. have, well, it's even gotten as bad as people being gunned down for opposing the Kremlin's views. Now, I do have to say that none of these claims are really official because the official Russian government never really acknowledges these things. That's part of why it's so shady. But within the journalism community, these things really are no secret. On the topic of Russia, President Trump actually had his first proper call with Putin this past week. Among the things he discussed was the New START program, which gives both the US and Russia until 2018 to lower their number of deployed nuclear warheads to no more than 1,550, the lowest level in decades. And Trump called it a bad deal, putting some doubt in the treaty's lasting power. During the 2016 election season, Trump had actually asserted that this deal was a loss for the U.S., allowing Russia to build up nuclear weapons while the U.S. could not. This is not true, however, as the deal has provisions that are essentially the same for both countries. At this point, I'm going to step aside from my usual neutral stance and say, what the hell? We need to continue disarming. There is literally no situation in which nuclear weapons are a good idea, or at least no situation in which building up nuclear weapons or not continuing to disarm is a good idea. The largest ones at our country's disposals right now could literally wreak havoc on the area between Philadelphia and New York City in one shot. One bomb, actually, has enough power to, I believe the specific thing it would do in that area, anybody within sight of the explosion would get third-degree burns on their flesh, and of course the effects of that heat and pressure would do damage to buildings. I mean, God, the blast itself could wipe out massive cities. We're talking bombs that can essentially destroy states in one shot. I mean, this technology, just because we haven't dropped nuclear bombs in, God, well over 50 years now, doesn't mean that we haven't kept developing them. Our bombs are huge now. They are unreal. They are world-ending. If we need to do anything, we need to continue disarming. I won't argue that we should throw all of our bombs out because, yeah, it's too late. We have to be realistic about living in a post-nuclear world, and part of being able to hold your own and living in a world where these things exist is to have some of them for yourself. But downsizing is the direction we need to be going in. You only need a few nukes to be a deterrent. I mean, once again, these are world-ending bombs, and we have thousands of them, especially between our two countries. It's absolute lunacy and madness. If we ever ran into a situation where we needed thousands of nukes, I don't even know why the hell we'd be fighting. We would all be dead. And usually in cases of war, that's an exaggeration. You know, we're not all going to die. When we're talking about nuclear war, we're all going to die. If it happens. Okay, deep breath and back to reporting. That's just, when it comes to nuclear weapons, I don't get it. I don't get it. Oh, okay. Trump actually did do something that makes sense, though, when he went on to speak with China in some other calls. U.S.-China relations have been kind of difficult recently, especially with Trump's anti-China speech, but one of the larger issues has been on the topic of the One China policy. In short, China and Taiwan have been at odds for a long time now over whether or not Taiwan is a legitimate government. And I mean, that's really simplifying things. In fact, China thinks China is China and Taiwan is China. And Taiwan thinks that Taiwan is China and China is China. So pretty much there are these two governments that are at odds with each other. And I mean, they couldn't be more different. China is obviously still this weird kind of communist that took on some capitalist tendencies. And Taiwan, for all intents and purposes, is kind of just a normal capitalist nation. In short, it's complicated and both countries are pretty bitter about it. Because of this, for years now, most countries, when it comes to foreign policy, have treated the two nations as one China on paper and then done trade and other things with them as though they're kind of not. This is a sloppy policy. I can see how you could see it as quote-unquote playing games. But when you're talking diplomacy with ginormous countries, sometimes you got to do stuff like this. It's not necessarily a really comfortable stance to be in, but it has proven to be stable. Trump, in his speeches in the past, has made it seem like he was not going to keep playing along with this standing policy. And China has expressed in the past that they will get violent over stuff like this. So, needless to say, things have been tense recently. Getting to my point, Trump essentially did a U-turn this week, reassuring Beijing that he does not want to harm relations between the US and China, and ultimately reaffirming the One China policy. Experts on foreign policy with China are happy with this move, as it's going to kind of slow down the weird heating up that's been happening with China and the US, and that's needed. China's not some little country that we can trample all over in the way that the US kind of likes to. China's big, China's dangerous, and one way or another, we gotta play along with them for the same reason they ultimately have to play along with us. We're two huge countries that control large numbers of money and people and weapons, etc. Stability is a good thing between the US and China, whether you like it or not. So seeing steps toward continuing stability, well, I can't argue with that. Now, for our final bit of Trump-related news today, California Representative Nancy Pelosi has finally come out to address calls for impeachment with what amounts to a bit of a reality check, at least I think, for everyone involved. In case any of you have been living under a rock recently, Trump is not exactly popular with the masses here in America, and a lot of people have been calling for his impeachment. Although about what, it hasn't really been specific. It's more just a bunch of people saying, impeach Trump. Well, here's the thing with that. In order to impeach a president, they have to break a law, and it has to be clear, and they have to be indicted, and there's all this other stuff that happens with it. And that's pretty much what Nancy Pelosi said. She essentially stated this past week that while there are certainly grounds for displeasure and unease in the American public right now, there are not yet grounds for impeachment on Trump. And this is important because we have to be realistic when we talk about these things. We can't just impeach people because we don't like them. We've got to work within the system. She went on to suggest that if Trump does slip up, then it will absolutely be on the table. I'm sure there is nothing Nancy Pelosi would like more than to spearhead something like that. But once again, we've got to work with what we got. And ultimately, that makes sense. The rules are the rules. They exist to make a bigger system more powerful and stable. And at the end of the day, you've got to live up to and follow those rules, even when you don't want to. That being said, if Trump has made anything clear with some of his recent business practices and some odd conflicts of interest going on right now, I haven't talked much about the whole Russia scandal thing because right now it's just a scandal. There's not a lot of solid evidence. But, in the event that something does pop up solid, I'll hop on that and talk about it. Those are the kinds of things that could get the dude impeached. Until that happens, once again, got to work within the system. Bringing things in for a landing, our last bit of news today has to do with a topic that I have covered multiple times on this show, climate change. Specifically, I want to leave you all with some new numbers. I've talked to you all in the past about the dangers of climate change, mentioning how newer studies have shown it is worse than we've previously thought, etc., etc. For the long version, check out episode 11 of The Big Picture. I talk about it in depth there. The new news that I want to leave you all with today is, like I said, a new solid number. For the first time, researchers have calculated just how much human beings are affecting climate change compared to Earth's normal cycles. The number, as well as the details behind it, was outlined in a paper published in the Anthropocene Review scientific journal. Drumroll, please. Humans are causing the Earth's climate to change at a rate of about 170 times faster than natural forces. I'm going to say that again for emphasis. That is 170 times faster than natural forces. I would like to remind our listeners listening on the Northeast coast that our last few winters, which have been uncharacteristically warm with a day spent in the mid-60s Fahrenheit, literally just last week here in Philly, are a direct, feelable result of this. 2016 was the warmest year on record. In fact, 16 of the 17 warmest years on record have happened since 2001. This is just a new study that serves as a reminder that despite the day-to-day nature of war and famine and crime and politics and all that other fun stuff, we do have a much bigger problem to deal with, one which we cannot hide from. One way or another, in the next 50, 100 years, we're going to be dealing with this. I know a lot of you already know this, but I just have to say it again. With sea levels rising and stuff like that, most of the world's population centers are in locations that will be underwater in the next 100 years. That's a lifetime. I mean, that's not a lot of time. For New York City to just go underwater, God, for in some cases countries to disappear off the face of the planet. I mean, the size of the refugee crisis that we would experience in a situation like that, if you think that times are turbulent today, holy crap, guys, we've seen nothing yet. God, the state of Florida will disappear. I mean, these projections, they're scary, and I hate to be doom and gloom on this show. I really do, because there are a lot of great things in the world. Crime, famine, stuff like that are historically down right now. But this is a big problem. We're starting to feel it. In my lifetime, I felt the differences, and it's not just here. It's in places all around the globe. This is something that we can't hide from. This is no different than if we were to find out that there's like a meteor on its way right now. We can say, oh, well, the meteor's not here right now, so what do we care? Doesn't change the fact that this is something that's going to happen and is happening. So, food for thought. Try to think about that when you vote in 2 years or 4 years or whatever. I know that it's a partisan thing right now, but it really shouldn't be. This is a humanity issue. On that note, I'm going to leave you all today. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of WHIP's Big Picture. I'm Tony Pearson. Have a great week.